I should. And I'm afraid this lesson is going to be an example of one of those times where I didn't quite do the research that I should have. And I will be receiving throughout the course of this lesson looks from my wife when I get cross stitch and knitting and several other of those things that ladies do and men do. Some I've seen them do in the nursing home. There's guys that can do stuff with needles that is really good. And I don't really have a handle on the difference real well. But when I was growing up, Mom did a whole bunch of knitting, and I think that's what the needles, right? Okay, got that part right. And when she did lots of the knitting, one of the things that was really fascinating is the fact that she could do it in all kinds of shapes or sizes. She did toboggans for us, headwear for the winter. She did sweaters on occasion. And what was amazing to me, too, is the fact that if you had a little brother like I used to have, who was just very curious, but had this bent of mischievousness in him, when he found one little string that was kind of sitting out there on a knit sweater, it's amazing how fast that will come unraveled. When he takes off with one hand and just laughing the whole way as he goes out the bedroom door, and I'm sitting there with Granny's nice, or may have been Nana's, I can't remember, nice, and it's just going back and forth, and it's coming off. And I thought, it's amazing to me how quickly things can fall apart when we don't keep that love that we have for each other knit close together. Colossians is one of the most Christ-centered epistles in the Bible. It's amazing. Ephesians is like the Christ of the church, or the church of Christ, and Colossians is the Christ of the church. It's an amazing book that teaches us about how important it is to have good relationships with each other, and how important those relationships are, and how things can come unbuckled when they're not. And to me, it's very interesting that in this particular context, Paul was even talking to people he had not seen face to face. Now, I don't know whether you're familiar with that kind of an emotion or not, or that kind of relationship, but I know lots of people, having been a preacher's kid and a grandson of a preacher, I've known lots and lots of Christians I've not seen face to face, but I know them, I know of them, I greatly respect them, and I have a love for them, a Christian love, because of the work they do. And I would like to think that that's what we ought to be deserving of if we're faithful Christians trying and struggling to do the Lord's work. Park Heights ought to be known as that kind of a congregation knit together in love, something that is holding together, not allowing somebody to grab that string and take off with it. The way Paul expresses himself here, for I want you to know, there are some things Paul wants these people to know. He has just finished in the very first chapter talking about the importance of the church and how the body is the church and the church is the body, and how we all ought to be unified. He's speaking to basically a Roman world, more or less, but he's telling them how important it is for us to be knit together in love. But he says, I want you to know that I have concerns. I know that we don't like to impose on each other, and more, I think, in our culture particularly, we like our social bubble. We don't like people intruding into that. And the only reason I'm kind of aware of that is I tend to go out and visit people, and I haven't been, on occasion, here, invited not to come by. Now, I'm not sure. I don't think it's because they don't like me, because they come frequently and they grab my hand and shake my hand or hug me, but they have invited me not to come by their house. Well, that's odd, because some people, it's like I was told here just this past week by a sweet lady that you come by anytime you want, you know you're welcome. That's kind of what I'm used to. But you know, we have a social bubble, and we don't like people intruding into our social bubble, but it is always good to know that people care. And I'll tell you what, very often it is the case that people don't know we care, because let's face it, nobody's telepathic. They can't read our mind. Mine would be a short story anyway. But the point being is they wouldn't know if you didn't tell them. So Paul's writing to Colossians, and he says, I want you to know I have a great conflict because of you. He said, I have that for you, and not only you, those in Laodicea too, those that haven't even seen my face. Because I want you to be encouraged by the truth of God's Word, and he'll get to that later on in verse 3, but I want you to be encouraged, I want you to be uplifted, I want you to all be on the same page and unified. And a great portion of Colossians is about being one, being unified in the body. Yes, we're very, very different, but all of us in the body have a very important place, and each of us need to do what we do the best we can do for God. And so he's trying to stress to them, even though I haven't seen some of you's face, I want your hearts to be encouraged. I want you to know that somebody cares about what you're doing and how you're doing, because it's important to the kingdom. Don't even have to know them face to face. I don't know whether you've ever done it in your prayers, to pray for somebody that's working. Well, I know people have done it here. As a matter of fact, I've heard public prayers prayed for missionaries overseas. I miss old David. David Singleton's not with us now. He's taken off and moved to another part of the country. And I miss him and Annie and miss the visits we used to have. But, you know, David always remembered in his prayers the missionaries, the preachers that are studying in preacher schools, and those that are doing work in foreign countries. It's nice to have someone be concerned about what you're doing. And so Paul is telling them, I'm very concerned about what y'all are doing. As a matter of fact, the focus that we all have together, and this is the unity we have, regardless of all the different things that go on in our lives, the different places we live, the different cultures we exist in, the different relationships we have, the one thing we do have in common is that we are all struggling to understand what God said so that we can live better Christian lives where we are and have an impact on those around us. And we all share that. We're all shooting for that at the same time. And he talks about the knowledge of the mystery of God, both of the Father and of Christ. And I know some folks, the mystical folks, the guys that want to make something hard out of something easy, would love to say all this mystery are things we can't understand. But Paul made it quite clear as he writes, I believe in the Ephesians, he says, you know, if you just read what I wrote, you'll understand the mystery that I'm talking about. And so in this particular text, he talks about our knowledge of the mystery of God. And basically that is a large rubric under which fits all of those things that God did in the Old Testament that led to Christ, that leads us to be the kinds of influence we ought to be. You'll notice following that in verse 3, he says, in whom, God and Christ, this knowledge, in whom are hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. If we're going to be the type of Christians we should be, if we're going to be maturing daily as we should, if we're going to have an impact on those about us, we have to have a wisdom and a knowledge of what we're about and who we are and why we're out there doing what we do. There are souls out there that are lost, and you know, we live in a culture that places so little emphasis on God anymore. If you looked at the Olympics and their opening ceremony, it just makes a person nauseous at what's going on in our world. And it's so much approved in our country, these kinds of perversions and the ugliness that we have in our culture. You know, if we love people and we care about them, the knowledge and wisdom that we can get from God can save them from the destiny that they are headed to at breakneck speed. But we can't do that if all we can come up with, which we do sometimes, is, I know it's in there somewhere. Guilty, okay? Not picking on anybody here but me. But don't you know the deficit it appears to be when somebody asks a question, we go, yeah, I know that's in there somewhere, but I don't know where. Now, I would encourage you to be honest about it. If you don't know, don't make something up. But certainly, we need to be able to give an answer for the hope that lies within us, meekness and fear. But we need to be able to give an answer where somebody can look at the book and realize this is not a personal thing. This is about the knowledge of God. And when you get the knowledge of God and I get the knowledge of God, there will be that knitting together in love, because we will be imitating Christ, who loved us so much, and we talked about it this morning, that he sacrificed everything to come down here to save our souls. This is such a personal little set of scriptures here, 1 through 3, of telling people, I care about you. And I've been doing this for a long time, but you know, as a preacher, I've done many eulogy, I've done many funerals. And I'm always amazed at the wonderful and pretty and nice things people say when someone has passed away. And my thoughts are always, why did we say that when they were alive to hear it? I don't mean to be rude, I'm just saying, while somebody's living, Can't we show this connection we have in love by telling people while they're still living, you're all right, you are special, I am concerned about you and what's going on in your life. When it talks about being knit together in love, it is amazing what that knit garment could do in the chill of Colorado up there in Craig, where that northern come out of the Canadian area and came and hit the Rockies and just went like this right there in Craig in the northwest corner and freeze you to death. That knitting together of those materials sure would keep you warm. There's a comfort and a consolation in knowing people care about you. They want to know what's going on in your life. In our culture where we have social bubbles and we try to keep kind of to ourselves, and I appreciate privacy. I was raised a bit different than most folks. I was born to an audience of interns. I've been in front of an audience most all of my life as a preacher's kid and then as a preacher. So my experience is not what most people experience. But what I would encourage you to do is get outside your comfort zone and tell somebody sometime, I'm concerned about you, I care about you, and you're important to me. That's what Paul was doing right there, as he talked to them about how we are all one as the church, as the body. We ought to be important to each other, and we ought to say something about it when we get opportunity. We ought to be knit together in love. Most of us here, I think everybody here is a member of the Lord's body. We encourage you, if you're not, to become a Christian. But if there is any need at all to change your life from where you were to where it needs to be, then we offer the invitation song to encourage you to do that as we stand together and ready to